ready to just keep it bare none, but really provide some insight and some tips so that would, families can feel a little bit more relaxed in how they approach their child, because that's where the mental health becomes over exasperated. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
Girl,
excited.
you're already preaching. You are already preaching it. So we're already recording. So I'm just going to pick up from where you are going to continue on from. But for everybody that's going to be watching this video, I just want to introduce you. So Jessica Nader, you're the owner and co-founder of PlaySmart Learning Center. And, it's an amazing little community that you've created right here for families in Palm Bay. That being said, I wanted to kind of bring a little bit of weight to what is the emotional and mental situation with our kids after the pandemic, because as a healthcare provider, one of the things that you notice now is more of kind of symptoms of what isolation is. So increased anxiety and depression in our kids. And it came directly after, mandates of having to be isolated and also to, have to wear masks, because that in itself, limits airway, causes some restriction, which then influences your mind to start freaking out. And as a child, you don't know what to do with all that. So you panic. And as a parent that might see your child hyperventilating would take your child to the ER. So there was a lot of those cases happening. And so now a few years later, what we're seeing is not as much of a social behavior, and how that's influencing adult connections now is basically just what we talked about earlier, finding ways to spend more times in front of a screen. So where that leads to down the road, we don't necessarily know. But as a, if as a parent, if that's watching, that actually wants to look out for certain signs, I know that you'd be a great asset to kind of address possibly what you consider. I know we talked about milestones. So what are healthy milestones that children should kind of focus in, or at least the parents help children focus on, and at certain ages? That was one thing. But really just anything that you feel like you like to input specifically off of what you found after the pandemic yourself.
And you put in two different things for me. Like when our students started coming back into childcare after 4 months of us, like not wanting to go to, enroll your child back in school, isolation comes from being able to be home safe. So that we have that isolation as like, we had this opportunity to go back home. We had this opportunity to connect as a family, creating a safe, secure environment. So at that base and at that core, if we think about it from that mindset, we now know that our child they have more opportunities to feel safer and secure. And as you introduce things like math, and you introduce things like small group, and then more people, and then being able to go out and socialize, you have to introduce those things, like when we go out with our friends, we're going to wear a mask, and I'll give you opportunities to take them off so that way you can X, Y, and Z. Those were things that were happening in our center when we had children wearing masks in the facility.
Mm-hmm.
When we go down to adding screen time to it, because that's something that also increased in prior to COVID. Zoom calls were more essential, being able to meet 6 feet apart, or it was just easy to use video chats. That's where all those, apps became so famous. And that also provided some type of care and disconnection so children could have a moment to themselves. Okay, I know that I've been in your face all day and you're hearing mommy voice, daddy voice, sister voice. Let's watch a show. Let me give you the screen so you can start playing with it. Then we became comfortable and dependent on this screen to, use as supervision and use as a tool to babysit. And I'll use the word not babysit, but just to occupy time and space. So when
Yeah.
we look at the fact that like it was amazing. Like our child was quiet, our child was in order condition. I was able to wash the dishes, do this, and then you started to kind of take steps away from interacting and allowing the screen to be the interactor. So like I'm a firm believer in, and you'll see in milestones that screen times are not recommended for children 0 to 2 years old. And people are like, really, in this time, in this day and age?
I know there's a lot of, I see babies like 2 years old that know how to unlock the phone. They know how to go on apps. Like the level of stimulation that those devices have for their brain to grow is great too. But in a sense, that's such a young age. So you're saying not before 2.
Yeah, not before 2. And if you do it, don't feel bad. Don't have that mommy guilt of
Yeah,
like, I had to because I'm a single mom, or because I'm, dad's away or mom's away. You just have to, you want to limit it. You want to be able to use it at its most optimal time, that you're able to do something that either is going to provide some care for you to do what you need to do as a mom or a dad, or as a caregiver, so that way you can separate yourself to go do something that requires an unsafe situation for your child. But then you don't want to be dependent on it. So the recommendation is that it's 25 minutes for a day for a child under the age of 2 to be in front of a screen.
okay,
Again, that seems, unrealistic, but
yeah,
if you were to just use it as a tool, just a tool to be able to enhance the day, as opposed to the ultimate tool that creates the day.
right,
And allow the child to be able to not only connect face to face on their level, building language, building development, and building connection. Like at the end of the, we have these beautiful beings, looking up at us, asking for information. And as
yeah,
opposed to looking at it like, "Oh, I've got to do this again," it's a gift, and it's something that we get to pour into. So using screen appropriately and making sure that it's age appropriate, putting concepts that are, at their level, that are going to be long-term language. So, the Blues Clues that we grew up with, the Daniel Tiger, not Daniel Tiger, because it was actually Mr. Rogers, and then it converted into Tiger. Um, Putting those type of shows in front of your 0 to 2 year olds, as opposed to those quick flashes, because those quick flashes are those are hindrances for children, because then the brain starts to function as like, I gotta act these quick responses, where if you were to use things like Mr. Rogers and Blues Clues and ABC and phonics, those slow dictions and those slow phonological awareness allows the brain to develop in a way where the child is going to be able to receive the information and then process the information, as opposed
yeah,
to a channel. So
yeah,
I would definitely make sure you're limiting screen time, and then just increasing it where you're doing it at the best parts of the day, that you're able to do something that's going to move the family or move the unit forward, as opposed to that tool for just, you know, building tablet fog. And that's a real thing. Tablet fog is a real thing.
yeah, yeah. And I guess you see that too in like scenarios where, well, like you mentioned, sometimes we don't know what's going on in someone's life, but when you're at dinner or you're out with the family, to make it a priority then to get off of the screens, which,
Yes.
that's that's more common that you see nowadays.
Yes. Like I have a 10-year-old, and she is active, she's engaged. I make sure she's aware. So when we do go out to restaurants, and this is obviously COVID, you couldn't go to restaurants, you were ordering in. But when we started going back out into the world and things started opening back up, um, you know, I bought a tablet so that way I can enjoy my meal.
Right.
I wanted to eat the food and I wanted to enjoy it. And then when I realized, when you look up, and I remember asking her to acknowledge it, like, look around. What do you see? And she looks around. By this time, she was like 6 or 7. No, no, no. She was 7. She was 7 years old. And she looks around and she's like, oh my gosh, everybody's looking down. Yes,
Hmm.
they're looking down and they're looking away. And,
Yeah,
and that's not, when I realized she saw that, that's when I realized I needed to do a deep dive in my own process and practices, and take away the tablet and take away my phone, and make sure that our phone is turned off, make sure our phone is turned down, so that way the indicators don't open up, so I deviate and look at it, so we can have conversations, so we can have, like, I had to teach myself, even as an educator, to be like, I got to talk to my baby over eating, because we had built this common practice of like, all right, when we go to a restaurant, like, we'll talk for a little bit and now you can get to go on your tablet. Now we just eliminate it, and now
yeah,
we just focus on eating, we focus on conversing, we focus on being awkward sometimes, because
yeah,
you can go sometimes. So
yeah,
like, I don't really have anything to talk to. So I acknowledge, babe, I don't really have anything to talk about. Like, what's going on in your world? Like, do you have any questions or anything popping up in your space? So that way we normalize having conversations, looking up, because that looking down really one affects us as older women and men as far as like gravity pulling down our skin and pulling that space, but it also allows us to look up and see the world that's happening outside of the screen, because there's so much reality that's happening that's just as entertaining as it is to watch a screen and be kept in entertainment.
Right, right. Oh my gosh, that's basically hitting on a lot of points about society in general nowadays. But to tie it back into the purpose of our discussion today in children, um, it sounds like we have to make it more of a priority now in this time to make it a habit, to
Yes.
make it a habit, because it so easily can slip into a way of being and something that's just passed down to our kids. So making it, right after the pandemic, we understand that we kind of went in our own worlds and decided for ourselves what's true for us. Do I really want to continue doing this? This is how we saw so many different shifts in so many industries afterwards. But the biggest thing too now is realizing where can we reconnect after that disconnection period that we had in our society. So I wanted to ask you too, have you noticed with children that come into your center anything as far as delay in meeting milestones or shifts in the milestones of different age ranges?
Every child is different. Every child grows at their own pace. So I try not to put in this stigma of like your child should be here, here, and here
Right.
when they entering back into the industry or back into our schools itself. But I do notice a difference, a huge shift from children who were born prior to the pandemic and went through the pandemic, and children who were born during the pandemic and then started socializing after the pandemic.
Mm,
Two different types of interactions and different expectations. So for prior to COVID, I saw children who were more hands-on, more communicative, asking questions that were more open-ended, not the yes or no's, but like, why does this happen? As opposed to, can I do this? Um,
mm,
I immediately. And then when the children who were socializing after the pandemic, there were limitations because, they were home, they were secure. And then when they started going out into the world, they were seeing things that were scary. Now, I wouldn't use the word scary because I don't think that they were scared. I think that they were confused. They were figuring out, like,
yeah,
is that on your face?
they were like fascinated, really.
Yeah, and it's like, what is that, mommy? I know that mom, when I talk to my mom and my dad and my brother and my sister, or your bubble that you were in when you were isolated, you weren't working with masks,
Right.
typically. And then here I'm out here, and there's like this triangular, this circular, these patterns, these words, some of it was different. I noticed the awness, and how children were trying to
Wow.
figure out what was happening. Um, and then as far as delays goes, um, teaching children how to play. That was more of a focus than it was in how children were learning, because children before COVID were ready to learn. They had all of these introductions because they were either in school, had a sibling, or their parents were already putting them in early childhood very much sooner than our parents put us in childcare. Because I know I didn't grow up in the center. So children didn't even know how to play. Like,
Wow.
touching and like a lot of like,
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
those were two different things, with hands on and then teaching them how to play, as opposed to let's learn the alphabet. It was more like, how do we help you make a friend? How do we help you with personal care routine? How do we
Yeah.
help you separate from your mom and your dad? That was a
Wow.
big socialization, like milestones that we were focusing on.
That's I mean, I don't know how to, if you would explain that as regressed or not, but it's just something that a lot of parents had to deal with just because it was a worldwide event, right? It wasn't just a local thing. But at the same time, you mentioned the level of question change? Was it a different age group that it went from what sounds like more, and this is something, you know, on a grander scale, when you look at people who have the ability to critically think and people who are able to ask questions, but they can't critically think.
Mhm.
So it sounds like one set of questions that initially kids were asking came from a more curious, exploratory, so they could piece things together in their own minds and come to their own conclusions. And then the other is asking permission, which, you know, that's a whole different, you know, type of society if it's just people that just ask, can I do this or not, right? So it's the opposite of being able to critically think and make assessments for your own. So can you speak to that a little bit more? Like, what age was that you're noticing?
I think the codependency started probably in our, well, that's interesting. I think more so in the twos and the ones. So our 4-year-old had a little bit more understanding of like getting out there a little bit more, but I definitely noticed a shift in the ones to the threes, because if a child was born in COVID, and I will say 6 to 9 months before COVID hit, you know, so, and I say hit before COVID shut things down, and a
Hmm.
child born 6 months before March, and they had never been in childcare, and now they're going into childcare at age 1 and 2. A good portion of parents were trying to figure out how to teach their child at home, how to, you know, create this safe nature of health and wellness, making sure you're washing your hands, making sure you're, you know, not, you know, taking your mask off when we're out. So a lot of permission, more
Yeah,
codependence, I think was
yeah,
more, and seeing it in our ones and threes, and going into this whole thing of like, no, no, you do it, because there's pride in taking,
yeah.
you know,
Autonomy.
putting on your shirts, putting on your underwear. There was this milestone of like, you did it, as opposed to let me do it, because your mom and your dad are at home and they're moving the needle, not just working but keeping the home moving. So your child is on the other side of the screen, especially if you're working. So
Yeah,
do this before I get on this call. Let me do this before da 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 da. And sometimes it was fast, and I don't want to generalize it. I just want to have this overview of the different type of children that come in that are more codependent and more self-reliant and not able to do things on their own because a parent had to do it, whether
right,
or whether they were not, they had to do it.
right.
So it was overwhelming. And when you introduce, like, and I know we'll probably get into this conversation about the mental health wellness of it all, but when you go into a child who isn't asked open-ended questions at age 2, or
Hmm.
being able to have that interaction of I share, I give, and not just focusing on object, then you're telling a parent your child is not meeting a milestone. And that is a tough conversation to have with someone who, you know, is thinking that their child is on par or is
Right.
on track in the right mindset, because there's no language. You know,
Yeah,
like there's more children in my facility lacking language and deep level language, as far as being able to ask 2 to 3 words at a certain age,
yeah,
able to communicate what their needs are instead of just waiting to be served. You know,
yeah,
so there is a lot more on the caregiver providing, helping, you know, 11 children in a 2-year-old room, you know, eat food because a parent was spoon feeding their child still at
yeah.
1 year old, because you could do it. You had time to do it. It was beautiful. So
Right.
between ages 1 and 3, where that codependency really was leaning more on them being told what to do and moving
Right.
them this grazing mindset to
Yeah.
what I teach at my school is independence, which I teach at my
Right.
school is connection by asking and communicating and partnering, not
Right.
for us to just do, because that's exhausting.
Right. Well, I don't know what to say about that. You're going to eventually at some point participate in group schooling, right? Which would be either public or private school. So whether you've decided to go about it the route of I'm going to do for my child, therefore not allow them to establish and do for themselves at an earlier age, at some point they're going to be held accountable, to go into it. It might be a little bit of a rough transition at that age too. But yeah, I would assume at some point, because I'm an optimist, right, that these children, even though they're delayed in a sense of a deep understanding of language and connection, that they're going to eventually run into it, I would hope, at some point in their development. But the trend that you're seeing to me is slightly disturbing, because now that a lot of parents are working from home, they are on Zoom calls a lot of the time. They're in front of their own device, and they need to be, but they can take time off, fix food, do laundry, that type of environment. So just to get some of your input, as far as how kids are dealing with that when parents are home, but their attention is not necessarily on their child. They're having to be distracted and to be away while the kid's home.
I think setting up a routine for me is just as important for just not only the home life, the day life, your work life, but also with how you're interacting with your children. So for me, I would always suggest, like, in the beginning of a Zoom call, you have these housekeeping rules. You're like, okay, put your video on mute, turn your video off. If you have any questions, move to the chat room. We'll break off in sessions. And these housekeeping rules, I think implementing those housekeeping rules for parents that are working from home with young children should be implemented, not only in the business practice of how you housekeep, but offering breaks for your Zoom calls so that way your child can have that connection. So, for example, my child is 10 years old, and she has a chart that's outside of this room that is like, if you need me, this, and this have to be done first before you ask me. Now, I can do that with a 10-year-old who can read, who can have self-control and be able to be self-aware that I am working. So for the children that are under 5 years old, what do I do? And that's where I think parent and provider and your employer need to be on that housekeeping portion. Like, all right, I'm going to be on this call. My daughter is set up for success. She's 2 years old, and I just gave her an activity to do, and it could be a screen time. It could be a sensory activity. It could be anything. But in 10 minutes, I would like to take a 1 to 3 minute break where I get to put my video on mute and turn off so I can assess what is going on in my home. I know that is unrealistic, but I also know that that's not a common practice. If we were to in that to be a common practice, then our businesses and ourselves would normalize that I can put this in my work schedule while I'm on my Zoom call. And also put in place for my children that are in the ranges of 3 to 6, because they are aware. They hear you working, but their needs need to be met because they are your child and they're asking a question. So instead of using the words no or stop or giving them the stank eye, it's a matter of when I'm on the call and practicing it, modeling it. Look, I want to practice with you. You turn on your camera, you do your mock play, and when I do this or when I do this and I start wiggling my fingers out here, nobody knows what's going on the other side of the screen. But my child knows on the other side of the screen, okay, my mom is connecting with me. She's wiggling fingers, and this is what I get to do at this moment. I get to touch her. I get to know that I have 5 minutes and I will then get my needs met. Or here's what I'm giving you. So that way you're giving those cues. So those are my tips for working moms that are in my facility that are like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get this done? And my child is at home. Set up a routine with your employer. Make sure you take breaks that are equivalent to you being focused on the job and the task that you're in front of your screen to do. And then having nonverbal cues for your child who is 2 and up that can be able to recognize that I am being acknowledged, my voice is still being heard, and I'm going to show a little bit of patience as my mom is doing this, or this. It'll give those prompts of modeling it after or before your call is set. So I it's hard to do.
I know.
But it's doable if you really just, again, go back to the basics. Always go back to the basics. What is my role? My role as a mom and my role is to work. So how do I mix and mirror those two things together and get the best outcome? And that is one, setting up a routine, making sure you have your tools in place, your snack order in your bin ready to roll, so that way that independent care can be given to your child. And if your child is 2 and under, knowing to set your time up during feedings. Like I know that I just breastfed or gave bottle fed my child, and I have a 2 hour window before her next feeding. And I also have a 30-minute window where she's either resting, he or she is resting, or she's idle enough to play to where I can engage in my work. And that's where you set your schedule for your work. So when you're on your screen, you're able to have their needs are still being able to be met. And I think that that would have allowed more connectivity and more attachment and connectivity for your child. So your child doesn't feel ignored, doesn't feel isolated in their own home while they're being safe from the public.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we were just literally talking about the difference of overdoing for your child and then having them come back out. And now here's the other scenario of when you are physically in the house with them, but they also have this strange concept of you're not really there. You're not able to be there for them. So how does that play out in a child's mind? We don't really quite know yet. So yeah, that's an important thing to consider. Making those breaks a habit. And as much as it might be painful to start a habit, sometimes it'll just become second nature, and it'll help in the long run.
100%. Setting up for success is making sure communication is happening with the people you're associating with here and who you're associating on the other side. And that's where you can build better connection in communication, and then applying the task,
Yeah.
applying resistance of, all right, my love, I'm going to be on this call from this to this. Having a mile marker on the other side of the door, where we have it at PlaceSmart as well, bathroom, and you have that occupied and open. So that way, those things are, if my light is green, that means I'm being occupied for work. And the
Yeah.
minute I close it, I'm not going to tell you I'm closing it. I'm actually going to just use that nonverbal cue and slide it, so that way that now you can come up when you need me, to now know that I'm available to you. That
Mhm.
self-awareness will help a child regulate. That's the whole
Yeah.
part, be able to have this self-regulation, to be able to know, can I, will I, or won't I? And
Right.
I love this. I love all of the social interaction, because it helps us as parents be able to connect more with our children, instead of disconnecting and using the screen or work, or I got to do this before I help you. And
Right.
that, be able to meet the need to know that our children are a priority, just like our work is a priority.
Right. What are some like tips that parents can now knowing the importance of connection, and how to things that they can do outside of, say, if they don't have an accessibility to code to a place or afford a place like PlaySmart, what are some of the things that they can do at home, if there are any basic tips, or to help create connection with other, maybe potentially other children? I feel like I'm a little bit out of touch, because when I grew up, you literally would go outside and there are other kids playing outside. Nowadays, it's not quite that much of a dynamic anymore, right? And people are more apprehensive to just let their kids go out and socialize. But that being the way that we did it, what are some of the things that you could suggest for parents? Would it be to schedule play dates, or anything that comes to mind in that regard?
Small group, and also small group, like going to mommy and me classes, going to the library, looking on in your local area on Facebook, to see where, moms are connecting. Where are moms and children connecting? That's
Okay.
one. Now, for me, I like organic, I like natural, and I'm also not going to seek other people. That's not my make. So I'm going to use my natural resources that I interact with my child to, like we were talking earlier about, going to the grocery store, going to Target, which again, Target is like the amazing place where mommies and children are going, and they're doing it as I just want to get out of the house, and I'm going to
Yeah.
get my, and I'm going to now peruse and go around. And just being able to take those natural things when you're standing in line or when you're in a toy aisle and children are connecting. You can pre-warn your child, okay, we're getting ready to go to Target, we're getting ready to go to the grocery store. I want to make sure that you're, and then set your boundaries. I won't give you those boundaries because I don't want to dictate what other parents are doing with their children. But for me, I would tell my daughter, make sure that you're not touching, tons of things in the set, in the store, and make sure you're being respectful. Use your manners. Say, excuse me, can I, excuse me, can I go around you? Or I'm sorry, are you doing this? So that way, then they have these directions of
Right.
communication will be established, and
Right.
you're interact with other people. I have made some really great friends by strangers in grocery stores, Target, the mall, where I was able to create hybrid, conversations and then being able to have play dates. So also setting up those times to reconnect with other friends. Let's say you have a friend that has a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 4-year-old, and you haven't talked to them in a long time. A
Right.
great to reestablish reconnectivity, not only in your own self as adults, but also to engage your children. Is,
Yeah.
can we get together? Can we go to the park? Can we go anywhere that's this, open space where one, I don't feel like it's a lot to heavy on to be able to relate to another person or have questions, but let's get them engaged. So play dates are essential, using your organic opportunities where you're going out into the world to be able to implement manners, implement permission, implement interaction. You could do that as well. And if you're able to get into those small groups like churches, Bible studies, these there's so much resources out there now that can allow yourself and your child to interact with, and it doesn't have to be enrolling your child in a public school or a child care provider to be able to
Right.
get. So those are my 3 suggestions.
Yeah.
This setting up play dates, and then being able to go into those mommy and me shops that are on Facebook, classes that where are we gathering and how you can engage.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's, at some point, a novice at something, but as soon as you start connecting with other people, I'm sure that you'll be able to kind of get those things back in return, and your child would be all the better for it. So yeah, well, thank you so much, Jessica. You are just a wealth of knowledge and information on so many things, but and specifically with what you're doing here in Brevard, I commend you so much for doing that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was an amazing opportunity to connect and just help families really understand socialization, isolation, and just being able to just step out of the norm can really create better bonds, better connectivity, and more ownership in how we are engaging. So we are building not children, but children who will be adults who are going to go out into the world and interact and create them for themselves.